Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Ask Lee. My name is Matt Oliphant, the Customer Happiness Specialist, and today we got the wise Lee Carroll. Lee, what's up, man?
Hi, Matt. I'm great, thanks. Good to be here. Looking forward to this chat today.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, so today's topic is all about winter blues, and definitely just in time for the start of winter. So yeah, Lee, what are your kind of initial first thoughts on winter blues and everything?
It's an interesting topic, Matt. And as an Australian, typically we don't get to experience this kind of issue. But I've had the pleasure of living in the US for 7 years when I was a bit younger. So I've got quite a lot of interest and personal history with this. My wife suffered quite badly from the winter blues when we were living in Madison, Wisconsin. So I would, if it's okay with you, I'd like to start just with some general comments about,
Sure.
what the winter kind of issues are, and then that might generate some questions from the audience. But before I get started, though, I need to say that the statements that I'm making today have not been evaluated by the FDA, and I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm a medical herbalist, and the content that I'm delivering is for educational purposes only, and you should not, and it's not intended to be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any particular disease. So the winter blues, it's got a technical definition which is called seasonal affective disorder, and it's a particular form of depression, and many people are aware of it, and the biggest contributor clearly is the reduced exposure to sunlight. So, our circadian rhythms are geared around, the length of the night and the length of the day. So when we have reduced amount of sunlight, then there's effects on the circadian rhythm that affects the production of melatonin. It affects the natural production of serotonin, and these neuromodulators can then have an influence over the mood and the feelings that people experience. So the dysregulated circadian rhythm is a significant kind of factor, but there's a number of things that play into it, and there's a number of issues which increase the risk or increase the chance of someone experiencing the winter blues. And vitamin D deficiency is a really big one. Low vitamin D levels during winter can have a significant impact on a whole bunch of factors, and there's some good evidence that if people have lower levels of serum vitamin D, then they're more likely to have the winter blues. So vitamin D becomes quite an important aspect. The production, underproduction or overproduction of melatonin plays a role. There does seem to be some predisposition in terms of genetics. So some people are more likely to have it, do everything right, but still are more likely to experience it just because of their heritage. As with a lot of health conditions, with this particular one, 4 times more women experience it than men, for example. So, there may be hormonal, contributions to that. And younger people, so if you're in the age bracket of like your late teens up until your early 30s, you've got, according to the research, a greater chance of developing it. If there's any pre-existing mood challenges, then someone's more likely to experience the winter effects. Yeah. And then the lifestyle factors play a really important role. So, being indoors, not getting outdoors plays a role. So, if you live in a cold climate, like embracing the cold and embracing the winter sports like snowshoeing or cross-country skiing and that sort of thing, plays an important role. Being sedentary is problematic for many, many things in terms of our health. and lack of physical activity can be quite a significant contributor to this whole process. So, maintaining active during the winter months, can be a bit of a challenge. Dietary habits play a role. So, we get our vitamin D from the sunlight that converts cholesterol into vitamin D. So, but we can also consume it as part of our food. Omega-3 fatty acids play a role, and if they're low in the diet, then that's a contributing factor that's known. So eating more oily fish or taking an omega-3 fatty acid supplement makes good sense. And then there's some environmental factors in terms of supporting it. So, sitting in front of bright light is probably got the best evidence. And there's lots of light kind of devices that you can put that someone can purchase that they would sit in front of when they're working or having their breakfast or whatever that can help moderate that. So that's just a bit of a quick snapshot of kind of like the highlights and the key factors. At the more nerdy, kind of biochemical end, systemic inflammation, poor antioxidant function. These things are very significant in all of the issues to do with mood. So there's some really interesting stuff in terms of consuming antioxidants, for example, natural antioxidants that have targeted effects, which can be quite beneficial.
Nice.
So that wraps up my kind of introductory remarks. I'll double click it back to you.
No, that was great. I was just kind of curious what antioxidants kind of come to mind for just vitamin D and supporting mood during the winter blues.
There's a feature in all cells that's called NRF2, and it's got a meaningless kind of name, but it's the master regulator of our antioxidant defenses. So it's a sensor, just like the thermostat that sits on our wall in our house that senses the temperature, and when it gets too high, it turns the air conditioner or the heater on, and when it gets too low, it turns the heater on or the air conditioner on. So this is like a thermostat for stress, and it receives stress signals, and then when it receives those signals, it translocates into the nucleus of the cell, and then it goes to the area of our DNA, which has the blueprint for all of our numerous antioxidant defenses. And depending on the influence, it codes on a particular part of the DNA to produce the appropriate defense for that particular type of stress. So the sorts of antioxidants in mood conditions, mood challenges, are the ones that interact with NRF2. So things like curcumin, for example, would play a role. That's kind of like at the top of the list. But resveratrol is well known as an NRF2 activator. Ergothione's an NRF2 activator. There's and all of the ones that do it appropriately are almost all of them are plant or animal based, as their origin, like they're not kind of chemicals.
Awesome. That's great. Cool. Well, let's move into the first question of today. So the first question is, what mushrooms are recommended for people who work in an office for a long period sitting?
I should say that, unlike mushrooms, there's not going to be a mushroom answer for every health question. So there'll always be a choice that you can make for a mushroom. But in terms of a mushroom where you're indoors, sitting, then when we're sedentary, there's all sorts of challenges that kick in because our biology, the way that we're physically kind of put together from a nuts and bolts perspective, requires periods in the day where there's increased blood flow. And the increased blood flow by doing cardiovascular exercise or any other sort of, resistance training, but it's mostly cardiovascular exercise. Supports the lining of our blood vessels in a way which keeps the whole body healthy, and it challenges our mitochondria, which means that they're renewing properly and we can get appropriate energy. So the two mushrooms that kind of stand out in that category are reishi and cordyceps. So both of those mushrooms have got significant influence, I think, over the health of the mitochondria. So not just in the vascular tissue, but like everywhere in the body and the brain included. So cordyceps is clearly linked with vitality and enhanced energy levels, and that's likely the mechanism. And reishi's got the same benefit, but it's more of a cardiovascular herb, so they work particularly well together. So, and then I would add ergothioneine on top of that. So you've got, like the golden oyster mushroom, which stands out as the biggest contributor in that area. So that would be like a trifecta of mushrooms that would be a mainstay, not just in that example, but I think for any person doing anything, just being a human requires that we, engage in these behaviors. We're kind of designed that way. And these things are hybrids between foods and, functional kind of substances.
Yeah, right on. What are your thoughts on like cooking mushrooms, just like sauteing, like shiitake, maitake, lion's mane? Would that kind of add into this as well, you think? Or
yeah, all mushrooms should be cooked. It makes their constituents more bioavailable. It makes them more digestible. In some cases, it neutralizes any kind of curious chemistry that might be objectionable to certain types of people. Like shiitake's got some sulfur-based compounds that need to be broken down. Otherwise, a small percentage of people can experience a type of dermatitis rash, for example. So sauteing is kind of like the archetypal way to cook a mushroom, and there's nothing wrong with that. And, using good quality oils and, doing it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes to break down a little bit of the mushroom kind of the cellular matrix so that you can absorb some of the nutrients. But I'm a really big fan of consuming some commercially produced extracts, which have been boiled for 2 to 3 hours and ground into very fine powders or spray dried into very small particles so that our bodies can get, as much accessibility. When you chew a mushroom, the body can't digest it. So the fineness with which you grind it up by chewing allows the body more access to the nutrients. So if you put your mushrooms out of the fry pan into the blender and then blend them up, that would be like the most ideal way of ensuring that you can get access to all of those nutrients. But we need to enjoy our food and we need to get pleasure from it. So not everything can be pureed that you eat. So, and it's quite pleasurable to chew on particularly a shiitake, which has got great texture. Lion's mane, when it's cooked, well, it can almost be meat-like, like in its texture. So I recommend people enjoy those things and then top up with a commercial extract just to ensure that we're not missing out on any of the goodies.
Totally. Kind of get the best of both worlds. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. It's kind of, yeah. All right, next question here. Next question asks, what are the best types of mushrooms for seasonal depression and what amount is needed to combat the blues?
Yeah, very good question. So I think the answer to that is that there's no one mushroom that stands out, but there's a mushroom constituent that stands out. So people would naturally put their hand up and say, lion's mane, let's do lion's mane. And there isn't currently any evidence for lion's mane in this particular category. Certainly lion's mane would be a good choice just in terms of general neurological health and ensuring that the apparatus that is your nervous system is as optimally healthy as possible. And we know that lion's mane does a bit of work in that area. But fungi and animals, so mushrooms and humans, share a common ancestor that goes back about 1 billion years. And as a result of that shared ancestry, there's quite a lot of shared biochemistry, physiology, and other related aspects. And two of the big ones, ergosterol, I say ergosterol, but ergosterol is a cell wall molecule that keeps fluidity in cell walls, and it allows proper communication and proper health of the organism. And humans have got cholesterol, which performs the same role. And unless you're a chemist or a scientist, if I held up an ergosterol and a cholesterol molecule, you couldn't tell them apart. They're almost identical. There's just one hydroxyl group that's different. So under the influence of UV light, ergosterol gets converted into vitamin D2 predominantly. And then that vitamin D2 is pretty much identical in terms of the performance in the human body as vitamin D3. So within the winter blues category, vitamin D levels are quite a significant contributor to the challenges that people experience. So having a mushroom that is optimized for D2 makes the most sense. And the two mushrooms that are the easiest to provide that ergosterol to get converted into D2 are shiitake and the agaricus mushroom. So if you grind them up into a small particle size and then you expose them to UV light, that ergosterol naturally gets converted into D2. And it happens in a wild mushroom. Most mushrooms are grown in kind of low light environments because they don't actually need light. So it can save money by not having the lights on. But if you pick a mushroom in the wild, it's exposed to quite high levels of sunlight, and they would be naturally high in vitamin D2. So it's an entirely natural process. There's nothing kind of artificial about exposing a mushroom to UV light. So the difference with D2 and D3 is the storage capacity. And there's a bit of the science is not complete on this, and there's a bunch of modern research suggesting that the storage capacity of D3 is not as good as previously thought. But in most people's minds, you can be intermittent with your dosing of D3 and you still can maintain optimal levels. But with D2, the science is quite firm that you need to do regular doses every day. And the optimal dose, or the upper end of the optimal dose, is 1,000 international units of D2 per day, every day. So that would be my advice, for someone that's looking for, a mushroom product to support their seasonal kind of winter challenges. And that's quite easy to do with a capsule that's got 1,000 international units of vitamin D. And then the next kind of category, which doesn't have any research yet to support it, but based on the fact that in these kind of mood issues, there's always, as I was saying, there's always a level of stress within the cells that in the nervous system that bring about these changes. So looking after the stress of those cells makes kind of foundational sense. And ergothioneine is the most missing link in the way that human cells regulate the natural fluctuations of their internal stress. So glutathione and ergothioneine play a partnership. And if ergothionene's low, then the glutathione doesn't do such a great job of managing the internal stresses and strains. So it can create a little bit of imbalance. So all of the functionality of those tissues. So if serotonin or melatonin arrives at a receptor and that sends a signal to the cell to do a particular thing, to regulate circadian rhythm or to alter kind of, some sort of behavior, and we feel that as a result of the way that we interpret the world, we're just not as happy, for example, then the environment of the cell greatly influences those mechanisms that I just very roughly outlined. So I think we will. There's evidence for certain of these compounds, but ergothioneine hasn't received enough attention yet. But I'm pretty confident that it would fall into that category because we're evolutionarily constructed or designed or programmed or built, like for that to be the primary, mechanism for backing up the way that cells do their thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Would you say that taking potentially like higher amounts of ergo, like in the colder months, would be more suitable? Or is it more like a consistent baseline dose of ergo regardless of the time of year?
Yeah. I don't think anybody's got the perfect answer for that question, but what I could say is that if you're a healthy person and you're not experiencing, any of these issues in a significant way, then I think the standard recommendation that I'm making now is that about 10 milligrams a day seems to be like a sweet spot. It's a little bit above what scientists say is the human requirement, but the human requirement is kind of like the point at which you would have deficiency kind of conditions. So we would want to set that point a little bit higher than that level. So 10 milligrams is at that point. So if you're the sort of person that is more susceptible to experiencing those winter challenges, then it does make logical sense to increase the consumption of ergothioneine, as a way of combating that intracellular stress. And we don't know what the high end. It's a very safe molecule, so there's no dangers with toxicity. So the danger is really wasting your financial resources on something where you could be applying them somewhere else. So I think 20 milligrams a day probably makes good sense, for someone that might expect to experience those challenges as a part of a prevention mitigation strategy. And for people that genuinely experience that, I think it's experimental because we don't have the evidence, and it's a relatively new kind of discovery. But I'd be very confident to suggest to people, and that 20 milligrams a day, 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams a day would be a really interesting place to experiment with those outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you. That was great. Alrighty, going to the next question here. Next question asks, in high sunshine states, can you still have the blues? It's a good one.
Yeah. Well, technically, no, because, it's a seasonal affective disorder and it's to do with the length of the day. So by definition, I guess, if you're living in a sunshine state, then your length of your day is longer. So the more north you get, the shorter your day. So when I was living in Wisconsin, I'd never had this experience in my life. It didn't get daylight until 7:30, 7:45, and then it was almost dark at 4:30. It's like, what the hell,
Holy cow.
But if you live in Florida, you don't have that experience. So it is all to do with how long the night is. That's kind of like the determinant. It's not so much the day length, it's the night length. But everybody's susceptible to these minor changes. So, if you've got underlying issues, if you're more sensitive to these kind of mood disturbances, then maybe, subtle changes in the length of the day might influence you. But it's much more profound, when you live in a more northern kind of climate.
Yeah.
I don't know where you would draw that line in the US, like above there, but definitely from the
Yeah.
Midwest up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was actually I was in Alaska a few weeks back, and the sun was not rising till about like 9:30 a.m. and then it would set at like 4:30. And then further north up in Alaska, it was rising at about 10:30 a.m. and setting at 3:30
Right.
p.m.,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
just crazy. So super
that's
wild,
bizarre. Yeah. That's
but
when the
super
bears are
fascinating.
hibernating, right?
Yeah, I hope so. But yeah, for the most part they are.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we'll go to some of the comments here. We got one from Chad. He asks, how can we know if our body doesn't tolerate some of your products? When should we stop using them? I really like a bunch of your products, but the Cordyceps Militaris seems harder for me to digest.
That's a great question, Chad. And everybody's slightly different. I'm in your camp. The Cordyceps militaris, I seem to have a little bit, particularly the one-to-one, have a little bit harder time kind of digesting it. So I think, like in the absence of being able to, knock on a healthcare professional's door and ask that specific question, I think we just have to be very mindful of the feedback that we get from our body. And a good example is lion's mane. It's the most popular mushroom at the moment. Thousands and thousands. I think I'm underestimating it. It's like millions of people are consuming
It's a
that
lot.
mushroom on a regular basis. Whereas
Yeah.
like in the past, it was a very niche mushroom and a very elite use, particularly traditionally, because it's very rare in the wild. So we're now seeing that a very, very small percentage of people can get an upset stomach or an upset digestive tract as a result of taking that lion's mane. Whereas traditionally, its primary use was to support conditions of the intestinal tract, not make them worse. So
Right.
even a mushroom that is, traditionally used to support an area of health can actually have the opposite effect in a small percentage of people. So the way to do it would be to be very vigilant and not be masochistic. I have heard that this mushroom is great for me, so this uncomfortable feeling that I've got, it may go away, and I'll just persevere with it. So I think the prudent thing to do is to either stop or significantly reduce the dose, and see how your body responds and whether whatever it is, the discomfort. So you might just feel some mild fullness in your stomach. It's like your stomach contents aren't like moving through as quickly, so you can just feel a little bit full. That's pretty mild, type consideration. And then if that helps, sometimes there needs to be a tolerance that's built up based on the bowel flora. So sometimes the feedback that we get is our bowel flora, of which in a healthy gut there's about 300 different species. In an unhealthy gut there may be 100 species. So those bacteria need to be fed. We just like we need to feed our pets. Like we've got to feed our bowel flora. And depending on what we feed them, they can be either happy or unhappy. And if we feed them a particular fiber, which promotes the growth of even a healthy bacteria, which might be in low numbers and it needs to be increased, if we feed them too quickly, we can overcome the tolerance that we've got, and we can feel a bit of discomfort. And from a gastrointestinal point of view, that's typically experienced as gas or farting. So it might just be a regular excessive amount of wind, but it also might have odor to it. So you might need to back off, reduce the dose, allow the bacteria to catch up with the amount of food that you're feeding them, and then over a period of time it will adjust, and then you can have the proper dose. If it's a more significant issue, like with the lion's mane, where it's like it might be painful, let's say, it's recommended to stop and seek some advice. And then if you're curious, you could start up again a couple of weeks or a month later just to double check that it wasn't something else. And if that same pain comes back, then immediately stop. And you know that, that mushroom's not for you. And mushrooms are really safe. The tolerance issues, across the broad, millions of people that take mushrooms is really, quite good. And it's only a very small, minority that have got any significant, kind of challenges with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hope that helps, Chad.
Yeah, that was great. This brought up a couple of questions for me. Do you think like with food or like without food would be in a better situation, or is it just going to be subjective for each person in this case for certain mushrooms as far as just how it sits, or what are your thoughts?
If there's bowel flora issues, then yeah, doing it with food can help, so that what's going into the bowel is a mix of different fibers. It's not just like the one thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like if you're drinking your mushroom extracts as teas, then often it's just like the one drink, or if you're putting your cordyceps into a shake, then there's going to be other things in there which might ameliorate. So
yeah,
there aren't any black and white kind of yes, no, like on off, type answers. It's this is why it's kind of like an art, like more than a science.
Yep, totally. Got to kind of find what resonates best with your biology. All right,
yeah.
Go back to the questions here. All right, so next question asks, do such things such as vitamin D, sauna, or red light, and being outside, if so, for how long, make a difference? I have a light box, but I can't tell if it's making a difference.
Good question. I'm not an expert in this area, but with vitamin D, I would recommend 1,000 international units a day. You don't need any more than that, but you just need to do it every day. So that's really easy to do. Sauna's great because it mimics cardiovascular exercise without actually, like doing the exercise. And there's great evidence for saunaing. And I think like 30 minutes of sauna 2 or 3 times a week would be kind of like the sweet spot. A neighbor of mine is a holistic medical doctor, and just a couple of years ago, she got a PhD in sauna science. She measured the toxicity that gets expressed out of the body in all of the different sweat glands. So she invites us down regularly for sauna. So I've got a bit of insight like into that sauna science. So
that's awesome.
The more often you sauna, the better. If you could do it every day, that would be optimal. And then with red light, I think for the winter blues, it's more bright kind of white light that mimics sunlight. And I think, and I am not the expert here, but I think 10,000 lux is kind of like, like a good point to be. And there's plenty of resources online where you can go and kind of ask these questions. Now you could probably just type it into ChatGPT, but 10,000 lux for about 30 minutes is probably, like a good amount of time. And then being outside, that's a really tough one. I'm a big fan of 45 minutes of kind of cardiovascular exercise every day. And if you can't do it every day, then if it's every other day, then it's an hour and a half. So you don't lose any of those 45 minutes. So the more often you can get outside, the better. And the mechanisms that create the tolerance to the cold, because all of these seasonal affective things are, there's cold weather that comes along with the reduced length of the daylight. There's brown fat in the body, particularly in the upper chest, just below the collarbones, and we can become adapted to the cold by experiencing that. So the more often you're in the cold, the more adapted you become. And cardiovascular exercise is not just about keeping your heart and your vascular system healthy. When you exercise your large muscles, those large muscles are not just an organ of strength. They're kind of surrogate, like endocrine glands as well, where they produce a whole bunch of molecules. And people often just roll off the tongue, oh, I'm high on endorphins as a result of just going for a run or a ride, or a swim or something.
Yeah.
But it isn't actually the endorphins, which are pain relieving molecules. It's the anandamide that the muscles produce, or that cause the body to produce, which anandamide interacts with CB1 receptors, which is the same receptor that THC interacts with. And that makes you feel good, and it's got huge health benefits. And there's another molecule called irisin, which is a protein which gets produced in muscle cells, and it supports cognitive function and mental health. So, the exercising your muscles has got all of those dual roles to play. So, got to find what you love, or work at something that you think you might love, and then turn that kind of mild interest into a love affair. So, whatever it is. Yeah. When I was living in the Midwest, it was cycling for me, but you can't cycle outside because of the snow or the salt on the roads and the temperature. Right. So I had a cutoff of 28 Fahrenheit. So if it got any colder than that, we weren't on the bike. We'd go for like a 3-hour ride with all of the mittens and goggles and everything. Yeah. And then when it was snowy, for me, it was cross-country skiing. But there's lots of outdoor activities you can do. I even did a bit of ice skating, which is great aerobic exercise if you like skating.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. What about like grounding? Do you think that would have any impact? Like if you're to ground like first thing in the morning to get that first bit of sunlight on your eyes and your skin, do you think that could be good for just kind of setting the pace for that day and just in general?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that area, but that makes, in terms of our biology, that makes sense. Because humans have lived in these cold climates and northern latitudes, for very long periods of time. So, they weren't all suffering from this, condition. So, as close to possible as, when the sun's available, getting some natural light on your eyes really significantly helps, set the circadian rhythm. And then not having possibly a bigger factor, and this is the most difficult thing to do, is watching television, sitting in front of a computer screen, or, being on your phone in bed, like before you go to sleep. You need, in my experience, like a couple of hours free of those devices and those lights before you go to bed, to encourage a really good night's sleep, because it's the deep sleep that is the reparative phase of our sleep cycle, and that happens early in the night. And significant sources of light late in the evening have a significant disrupting effect on the quality of that deep sleep. So I've got an Oura ring, so I measure my deep sleep every day. So deep sleep for me is a bit of a challenge. I don't naturally get enough. I think I could trace it back to night shift that I did for 10 years when I was a younger person that screwed up my kind of circadian rhythm. But the difference for me between sitting in front of a computer screen or a television to, watching a movie is about 25 or 30 minutes of deep sleep that I get robbed if I do those behaviors within that 2-hour window before going to bed. So, and I have been adopting this strategy that's now becoming quite popular. People like Andrew Huberman are really promoting it, of getting up and experiencing the natural light first thing. And it's quite surprising how quickly the circadian rhythm alters. I'm waking up without any effort much earlier, only after like 2 weeks of engaging in this sort of behavior. But I'm in the opposite hemisphere, so for me, my days are getting longer, while yours are getting shorter.
Right on. What about, do you think blue light blocking glasses help, or does it really not address the main issue, which is just avoiding like being on your phone and things like that before bed? or what's your stance on that?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not an expert, but hearing experts talk, the blue light blocking glasses, sound like they work. I don't have any experience.
Yeah.
And that, for a lot of people, that makes the most sense, because some people are like, well, I just can't do that. Like, that's the time
Right.
in the night where I need to relax, and TV's how I want to do it. Or
Yeah.
I have a bunch of patients who have busy lives, and they put their kids to bed, and then those 2 hours before bed, they're catching up on emails, and
Right.
if they didn't do that, then they're not going to do it, so they'd fall behind. So it's
Yeah.
it brings the blue light glasses thing into sharp kind of focus. I guess it's a matter of being having a set of glasses that does the job. Like,
Yeah.
whether depending on the kind of light sources, does it come in through the side or whatever. But it would be a worthwhile thing to invest in, if you're wanting to experiment with it. And I'm looking at that as well. I've got multiple pairs of glasses. It can be very expensive having
Yeah.
the prescription glasses and the groovy kind of frames.
Nice.
So I am thinking of maybe someone probably sells clip-ons where I can just clip it over the existing ones and save a bit of money.
Nice. Yeah, I found if you do like where you switch the screen setting to like a warm tone, I do that with the computer plus my phone, and I feel like that kind of helps just reduce like just eye fatigue and just that exposure to blue light throughout the whole day. But kind of helps.
It does,
hack.
but in my case of an N of 1 trial, it makes no difference to the deep sleep.
Yeah,
it might reduce my eye fatigue a little bit. And the blue light's not just about sleep. The blue light affects the health of the cells, like in the tissues of the eye. So some people are more, there's more risk around getting dry eyes and having red eyes and having altered kind of vascular function.
Awesome. That was great. Alrighty, going to the next question here. Next question asks, my wife suffers from seasonal affective disorder, SAD. What products do you recommend for her?
Yeah, in the world of being FDA compliant, I strictly shouldn't talk about products. So, but the products that contain vitamin D2 would be the ones that I would go with. So there can be products that are straight D2 that have got agaricus and shiitake, and they're guaranteed to be 1,000 international units per capsule. So that would be primary choice. And then there's vitamin D2 with zinc. So it's the same thing, but it's got 30 milligrams of zinc attached to it. So if there's a need for zinc, and zinc's a very important metal that's commonly low in people. So particularly if a person is prone to more regular infections, there might, because zinc gets used up as a result of immune challenges. So zinc, with or without zinc, one of those two products would be the way to go. And then the ergo product that has 10 milligrams of ergothioneine, I'd be recommending 2 of those a day.
Right on. For the
along
zinc,
with all of the other things, so there's lots of herbs that can help in this area, which real mushrooms doesn't have, but other companies do. St. John's wort, saffron, highly bioavailable curcumin, chase tree has got good evidence for increasing melatonin production. If melatonin's low, lemon verbena can do that. There's certain foods that are high in melatonin.
Nice. For the for zinc, is there a certain form that you like over another?
I think as long as it's a bioavailable form, I think it doesn't matter. So, bisglycinates are highly bioavailable, so that's a good place to start. But any of the chelated zincs, perform well. I don't.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that helps. Awesome. Alrighty, going to the next one. Is there such a thing as taking too much vitamin D during the winter months?
Yeah, there is. And more is not always better. So I think with vitamin D2, I think 1,000 international units, 2,000 international units a day is probably all you need to do on a regular basis. With vitamin D3, you could do, thousands of international units and do it once or twice a week. But D2 doesn't have that same characteristic.
Yeah.
And there aren't any things called magic bullets. It's the magic shotgun, where each little pellet is a magic kind of individual bullet. So it's a matter of getting the pattern and the picture right across all of the domains. It's not just one thing that's going to be beneficial in this type of setting. So it's a bit of each, and you could see it as like a mosaic, or a jigsaw puzzle. So depending on how you put the pieces in, each person's got a unique kind of set of pieces that solves their unique mosaic or their unique jigsaw puzzle. And not everybody's got the same kind of solution or the same types of pieces or tiles.
Yeah. Nice. For vitamin D, what about if one eats like ample amount of vitamin D rich foods? Would it be necessary to supplement with vitamin D in tandem, or would it be like a couple times a week, or what's your stance on that?
That's actually a hard question to answer, because when we eat vitamin-rich foods, we don't really know what we're getting. And we don't know what the dosage relationships are. So I think my advice would be, particularly if you're a woman and you're more likely to experience, the winter blues, then it would make sense to, in the lead up, and we're kind of in it right now, but you might start next year at the end of September, so that you come into it optimized for your vitamin D. That I would recommend 1,000 international units of D2 if that's your preference, a day, just as insurance, to make sure that you don't dip below what's going to be the optimal level for you.
Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. All right, I'll go back to the live comments here. And we got Bill has a question. Any medicinal value in pulsing like every couple of months, pause for a week or so? I'm guessing like a pulse light box. Is that what you're interpreting?
Yeah, I think Bill might mean taking the mushrooms. Is there any relevance in pulsing those? It's a vexing question, that one. And, there's a line of argument that I don't necessarily agree with, that if you give your body something on a regular basis, it'll get used to it and it'll diminish its kind of value. I don't necessarily agree with that. And it often gets brought up in the context of kind of adaptogenic herbs. But my training and education, over 30 years, never included that as kind of like a recommendation. People point to tolerances building up with substances like nicotine, for example, early on, a little bit of it gives you a great kind of experience, but then as you go on, you need more and more and more because you build up like a tolerance to it. So mushrooms don't work in that way, and there isn't chemistry in them that has that particular kind of ability to create tolerances within cells. And so I don't necessarily advise it, although I think it's a natural consequence of the human condition to be irregular in our behaviors. So, I just said, the ideal exercise routine is 45 minutes every day. I don't do that. I have 2 days in a week where I have off, and then I might not feel great. So I might have 4 days off one week and then, not back that up the next week, just so we whenever we're engaging in these long-term behaviors, there's a natural ebb and flow. And with medicinal mushrooms, the main game from my point of view is that we engage with it as if it's a lifestyle choice that we carry throughout our entire life. So just like good exercise, just like a healthy diet, just like good mental hygiene and good practices, just like good oral hygiene, we brush our teeth every day. You might forget a few times, but we do them every day because we know over the long course they'll keep us, protected and optimally healthy. So if you naturally fall out of love with a particular mushroom, then that's fine. Just pop in another one. So, if you've been doing cordyceps for a few months and you're like, oh, I'm tired of that, I'm going to do another one. So then move on to reishi. And then you might think, well, reishi's great. I'm going to do that every day for the rest of my life. I'm really into that. But then you might bring in another one, like on top of that. And the more variety you have with the mushrooms, both culinary as well as supplemental mushrooms, the healthier we are. And I've created the gourmet ape theory as a way of explaining that in the modern dietary realm, we exist in a duality. It's either plants or animals. Like, that's the choice. And you can be all sorts of variations. You can be a carnivore, you can be a pescatarian, you can be a vegan, a vegetarian, but no one ever talks about being a fungitarian or a fungivore. So we need to bring fungi in as a legitimate third food group, which is a different kingdom of life. And rather than mushrooms just being an optional extra or as an optional supplement, they become a permanent feature of a healthy diet. So in a reimagining of the food pyramid, one of those tiles, and there's lots wrong with the food pyramid, in one of those tiles, you would just have mushrooms and they would be near the top. And the quantity of those would be necessary. Oh, excuse me. I just had to close my side window. There's a bit of noise in the background. So, that's my kind of long-winded answer around a really good question, actually. So, just recapping, no, I don't think there's any need to, but it'll happen naturally, and that's okay.
Awesome. Thank you. That was great. All right, got another live question here. A. Jenkins asks, can our pets benefit from vitamin D2?
I'm not a vet, so, I'm not fully authorized to talk about, animals in that way, but cats and dogs don't make vitamin D2 like humans do. So we can convert cholesterol via sunlight into vitamin D3. So dogs and cats can't do that. So they need to get all of their vitamin D from a dietary source. So vitamin D2 is a legitimate vitamin D2 source for cats and dogs and most likely any other animal.
Yeah. Good stuff. Awesome. Thank you. All right, go back to the questions here. All right, next question asks, how does gut health tie into mood and energy support during the winter blue months?
It's a really tight connection between the gut and the brain, and we now call it the gut-brain axis. So, my long kind of experience in the industry, going back when I started 1990, if you talked about a link between the gut and the brain, conventional medical minds just laughed and said, "You're a quack." There's no evidence for that. And we're like, oh, really? We observe that. You support the gut and mood improves. So you wind the clock forward, and we're now we understand all of the different cytokines that the immune system makes as a result of being stressed and inflamed, and how they impact on mood. And the gut is a significant source of systemic disturbance and inflammation. So if we have unhealthy gut, then the most kind of basic aspect of an unhealthy gut is a dysbiosis in the microbial communities that live there. So in the gut, there's a there's a luminal space in your gut. That's, I guess, where your poop is, if you want to think about it like that. And there's a type of bacteria that live in that environment. And then there's another type of bacteria that live in the mucus that line the gut. So if there's disruptions to those communities, then inflammatory molecules can get produced. And then that can cause leakiness between the cells. And then lipopolysaccharide is a fragment from a bacterial cell wall, which is very, very disturbing to the immune system. And little bits and pieces of that can get into circulation and create what is a systemic inflammatory environment. And then that brings about a cascade of events, which then can affect mood and mental health and mental functioning, and coalesce the processes around dysfunction in many different organ systems. So the liver's not as healthy, the skin's not as healthy, the other systems in the body just don't work as well. And the benefit of mushrooms, and every mushroom, kind of fits into this category, is that the insoluble fibers and the soluble fibers in mushrooms all are significant prebiotic foods for those bowel flora that I was just talking about. So they're a very significant contributor to having and maintaining a healthy gut. So therefore, for those people that are more sensitive to seasonal, challenges, then that removes one of the inputs which might make that seasonal challenge worse. So clearly it doesn't affect the length of the night or the day, but it helps to fine tune the physiology and the structures and the function of those structures so that they're more optimally functioning. And when you get control of that and you can decrease the amount of systemic kind of stress, then that naturally increases your energy. So when you've got elevated cytokines, so cytokines are the messaging molecules that the immune system uses to say, hey guys, there's a disturbance in the bowel, there's a disturbance in the liver, we need to recruit, like support to help these guys out. Those are the molecules that control all of that stuff. And every one of us has experienced a cold or a flu, or in some cases COVID even, and we all know what that kind of period between thinking, I think I'm not well and I am not well, that period in that early stage where you have no energy, you're very listless, that lack of energy gets brought about because of the high level of those circulating cytokines. So there's a natural feedback and intelligence in the body that says when those molecules are high, all of the energy reserves of your body need to be directed towards, managing that threat, whatever that threat is. And the best way to deal with that is to be like horizontal and resting. So it's a natural consequence of those molecules to make you feel tired and to make you rest, because it's the way that we recover from those challenges. So a big part of the lack of energy is to do with the systemic kind of stress which comes from an unhealthy gut. So you fix up the gut and then you can improve the energy. So it's not likely to be a resolution for these winter kind of challenges that we're talking about, but it's quite a significant piece of the puzzle. And it isn't an overnight fix. You can't just change your diet or take some mushrooms for a couple of days or a few weeks to solve that problem. There's a coordinated program that I would use in a clinical setting, which is mushrooms and a whole bunch of other things. And it takes about 10 to 12 weeks. But if you have a lifestyle where you engage with mushrooms every day, I have observed that over the course of years that the patient's resilience and gut health significantly improve year on year on year. And to give a sporting perspective on that, if you want to be an Olympic champion, or if you want to be a world champion, or an elite athlete in any area, it doesn't happen overnight. and it's many years in the making. And the strength and the resilience and the capacity of the body just gets better and better and better, like the more and more you engage with these particular behaviors. So taking mushrooms every day in that context is like, it's like giving your bowel flora a workout every day. It's like going to the gym every day, but you're doing it, like in how your gastrointestinal tract needs to be supported. So don't have necessarily a short view of the outcomes on these things. It's a long view. We're talking about health span, as opposed to like just correcting a particular thing in one season.
Yeah, man, that was beautiful. Thanks for diving deep on that. It was great. We're pretty much out of time, but do you have any closing remarks or any last bits of wisdom you want to drop before let people go here?
I think I've developed a pattern of saying that, and I've already said it a few times, that, my parting comments are always along the lines of, get on the mushroom train and don't ever get off. Like it's a for life kind of dietary lifestyle change. And, the mushrooms, the carriages that you ride in might be different, throughout your life's journey, but you're always on that, that fungi train, slowly as you go through time, improving the quality of your health and, supporting your health across the lifespan.
Right on. You heard him. That's great, Lee. Thanks for all the good stuff. That was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure, Matt. Yeah, great questions, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Yep. I think we're actually off next month, but we'll see you guys in the new year.
Oh, we're off in January. Yeah, so in February.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see you in February, and happy holidays, happy New Year, and see you guys real soon.
Happy holidays, happy New Year, everyone. Thanks, Matt. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Lee.